The thing about untold and unheard stories is that it takes so much energy when we're first encountering them to see why they matter or to learn new names and new characters to make the story feel real. Sometimes it can also be really hard to figure out, what does this have to do with anything? And for the last few days, as I've been journeying through ahead of you this tale, this wonderful story of this unlikely and somewhat problematic hero of Jael, and this all-powerful general, Sisera, and even the Israelite general, Barak, all very unfamiliar names. As I've been journeying along ahead of you and getting to know them a little bit, there's been something on my mind that I'd like to share with you. I've noticed more and more that as a parent, I get into conversations with my kids where I already know what they're going to say before they say it. I already know the conversation we're about to have. And reading this story, I've begun to realize how dangerous it is, how it undermines the relationship, how in some ways it might inadvertently be breaking trust and making my kids feel that they go unheard. Well, that's the last thing that I want as a parent. I'd like to have you join me now with a little bit of study in and reading into this story so we can figure out how all these pieces fit together. So some backstory first, before we jump into the story that is actually at the heart of things. In the book of Judges, what we have is, this is after the Exodus, this is after the Israelites have been brought into the promised land, and they've been at war with the Canaanites. And then there's a period, one of these judges with Deborah, and in it we are told that the Israelites again had messed up, and so God had punished them by allowing for the Canaanites to rule over them. And the story is set right now, the moment that we're about to hear, where Deborah is preparing to have her head general, Barak, go and fight the Canaanites, push back. And as she does so, she tells Barak to go do this, and General Barak says, okay, but on one condition. I'll go do this, but you're coming with me. And her response was, well, fine, I'll go with you. But you won't be the one that gets complete victory. This foreign general, Sisera, will be delivered into the hands of a woman because you didn't go off on your own to go do this. So the setup for what we're about to hear is that Deborah, having a conversation, having an argument with her top general, says that an unlikely hero will be brought up to the surface. The story we're about to hear is in some ways actually fairly problematic. And in an odd twist of fate, the all-powerful General Sisera, who we'll learn about a little bit more, turns into the victim. The roles are all flipped and reversed and flipped upside down, and we have an opportunity to start to dive into why. I'd like for you to join me now. For those of you who are reading along at home, this is Judges chapter 4. And as we get into it, it's 17 through 22 are the verses if you're reading along at home. Now Sisera had fled away on foot to the tent of Jael, wife of Heber the Kenite. For there was peace between King Jabin of Hazor and the clan of Heber the Kenite. Jael came out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Turn aside, my lord, turn aside to me, have no fear." And so he turned aside to her into the tent, and she covered him with a rug. Then he said to her, "Please give me a little water to drink, for I am thirsty." So she opened a skin of milk and gave him a drink and covered him. He said to her, "Stand at the entrance of the tent, and if anybody comes and asks you, 'Is anyone here?' say no." But Jael, wife of Heber, took a tent peg and took a hammer in her hand and went softly to him and drove the peg into his temple until it went down into the ground. he was lying fast asleep from weariness and died. Then, as Barak came in pursuit of Sisera, Jael went out to meet him and said, "Come, and I will show you the man whom you are seeking." So he went into her tent, and there was Sisera lying dead with the tent peg in his temple. Whew. In this story, what we hear of is the events that have transpired after the promise of Deborah. So Deborah tells Barak, "Go. You're not going to get the final victory, but go and fight this man." Now, Sisera, we need to learn a little bit about this guy. There's a lot of different background on who he could have been and what his name was, and scholars say all sorts of things. That's not really the important part. What matters is that what is known from Scripture or understood in Scripture is that he was the head of a major, massive regional army. He had alone just 900 chariots. In addition to a whole army, 900 chariots driven by horses. At the time, he would have been a terrifying force. On the scale of the U.S. forces in World War II or of the Spanish Armada, we're talking a big, massive show of force. And they come, and Barak with his men show up to fight. Deborah has called out for all the different Israelite tribes to send troops, and many answered. And then in the showdown, there are two different tellings of this fight, but in the showdown, what becomes clear is Sisera's army is completely and utterly routed. Some of the counts actually show of every single man of Sisera's army is absolutely wiped out and killed. Sisera flees on foot. And this is where we land on today's story. Sisera, coming through that encampment, feels that he is safe. These are people that are friendly with the king that he has been serving. But not only that, he is now beckoned by the wife of the man who runs and leads this entire tribe. "Come into my tent." And he shows up and she covers him up. He asks for water. She gives milk, a sign of hospitality. He is completely blind to the ruse. He is completely blind that she is guiding him in. And for reasons that we're never told, she sets him up to kill him. Rabbis have argued for centuries over what it meant and why she would have done this. Everything from having been religiously observant to having been called by God specially and not really even knowing what she was doing, to this having been potentially revenge or self-protection. It also could have just been the political reality of, well, this guy is the loser, so we might as well be friends with the winners. There are so many different directions it could go. So many so that it really doesn't matter what her motives are. Jael becomes this unlikely hero because most of us should be worried about her right now. Sisera not only leads this big, massive army, but he has this legendary kind of persona around him. It is said that his voice could shake the walls of buildings and stop wild animals dead in their tracks, even killing them. He is a man of full presence and power. Early readers would have seen him coming and said, "Oh, I hope she's going to be okay." But he's the one that becomes the victim. He comes in with all that swagger, all that power, all that self-assurance. He knows what to expect in the world. And even though he has just lost his entire army, even though the battle is done, he is still so self-assured that he knows what to expect. And so she beckons him in, and he feels safe. She covers him in a rug or a blanket, and he feels safe. She extends hospitality. And yes, she breaks hospitality, but she extends hospitality, and he is secure. So secure, he tries to get the only good night's sleep that he's had, and it is his undoing. So what is he falling victim to here? I guess we should ask. Well, I would call it a very special form of prejudice. You see, usually when we talk about that word prejudice, we are thinking in terms of ethnic or racial or sexual or gender, This idea of, I know who you are because I have a preconceived notion of who you are. But really, it's much, much more broad than that. A prejudice doesn't have to be my ideas around someone or something. It could simply be any preconceived notion that tells us or trains us to know what we're getting into, to tell us the expectations. And these prejudices can be our undoing. At the beginning, I mentioned how even with my own kids, as I've been reflecting on this story, I've been made to wonder, in what ways do I walk into my own conversations with my kids, with my spouse, coworkers? Are we carrying the assumption of, I know what they're going to be saying, I know what they're going to be doing? And so we don't listen as much. I find that a lot of communication breakdown ends up happening because we already think we know what to expect. I can think of an example recently with a friend of mine here in the congregation, where I named something and that friend said, well, that is one way of seeing it. Forcing me to realize again, oh, I'd fallen into that trap. That trap is so easy to fall into, and it can be the death, the nail in the coffin in some cases, to friendships, to marriages, to relationships of all kinds. Sisera's prejudice is one that is so common with all of us, really. But I have some good news. We don't have to be destined to live that out. We can train ourselves. We can learn from past experience. We can recognize in ourselves when we're starting to feel oh, I know where they're going with this. With that crazy friend who has fully divergent political beliefs from any of us, they kind of get under our skin, but we've been friends so long that we just kind of let them talk. Actually stopping and listening, pretending to ourselves, if you have to, that you don't know what they're about to say can be amazing, because we can hear new pieces of information. We can hear new ways of things being discussed, not in order necessarily to change our minds, but your friend knows they're actually being heard. It further cements a relationship. Not only that, but we fully start to better understand each other and the why that lies behind different views. I've been practicing it this week, actively trying to stop and not assume I know what my child is going to ask for. I really stop and listen. And you know what I found? They're coming to me more with their stories. They're coming to me more wanting to talk. They're coming because they know that there is more of a safe place than there possibly had been. And I try to listen. It's amazing how we can get in our own way from time to time. And just like Sisera, we can run into trouble when we think we know what to expect in the situation. When we think we know what is about to happen. But by pausing, by being open, by being listening. It's amazing. It is simply amazing the way in which our relationships can be blessed. This story of Jael and Sisera is ancient. It's one of the oldest stories in all of Scripture, in fact. The Song of Deborah, that's the oldest version of this story, is one of the oldest pieces of Scripture we have. It's been with us so long, and yet is so little understood. I hope this fragment, this one little fragment of Sisera being so locked up in his own understanding of his own assumptions, might help us in the days ahead for these uncertain times in which we live, and that it might be a blessing for you. Go in peace, my friends.